Before we talk about conquest battles and borders, let us ask a question that has divided historians for centuries. Was Aurangzeb the greatest empire builder in Indian history, or the ruler whose ambition planted the seeds of imperial collapse? When Aurangzeb ascended the Mughal throne in 1658, he inherited an empire that was already vast, wealthy, and sophisticated. Yet, over the next half-century, he would push its boundaries farther than any Mughal before him, ruling longer than almost all of them combined. He transformed the Mughal state from a court-centered imperial system into a war-driven military machine. In this video, we'll explore how Aurangzeb expanded his empire, why he did it, how he controlled such enormous territory for so long, and why those same expansions ultimately strained the empire to its breaking point. Aurangzeb's story isn't just one of conquest or cruelty. It's a story of ideology, administration, faith, fear, and the brutal realities of ruling one of the largest pre-modern empires on Earth. To understand his expansion, we must begin with the man himself, a ruler shaped by discipline, religious devotion, and political paranoia. Born in 1618 as the third son of Emperor Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb grew up far from the pleasures of the Mughal court. He was rigorously trained in military command, Islamic law, and governance, developing a reputation for personal austerity and iron self-control that set him apart from his more flamboyant brothers. When the Mughal succession crisis erupted in the late 1650s, Aurangzeb emerged victorious through strategic alliances, battlefield success, and ruthless decisiveness. He imprisoned his father and executed his rivals, an act that shocked contemporaries, but also signaled the beginning of a new, harder phase of Mughal rule. Once crowned emperor, Aurangzeb ruled over an empire stretching from Afghanistan to Bengal. Yet he wasn't satisfied with inherited borders. He believed that a ruler's legitimacy came not only from lineage but from constant expansion and the defense of Islamic sovereignty. This belief would drive nearly every major decision of his reign, especially in the Deccan, a region that would consume more than half of his rule and nearly all of the empire's surplus resources. The Deccan wasn't just a geographic frontier. It was a political and ideological challenge. It was dominated by powerful Muslim sultanates like Bijapur and Golconda, alongside rising Hindu powers such as the Marathas. While previous Mughal emperors had managed the Deccan through diplomacy and limited campaigns, Aurangzeb sought total domination. He was convinced that only direct rule could secure the empire's southern flank. In the early years of his reign, he consolidated control in the north, suppressing rebellions, tightening administrative oversight, and reinforcing the mansabdari system that tied military service to land revenue. This system allowed him to mobilize enormous armies with remarkable speed. These reforms initially strengthened the empire, enabling Aurangzeb to project power across vast distances. But they also increased dependence on constant territorial expansion to fund the military elite, creating a system that required perpetual conquest to survive. Nowhere was this more evident than in the Deccan campaigns, which began in earnest in the 1680s. Aurangzeb personally moved south with the imperial court, committing himself fully to the destruction of Bijapur and Golconda. After years of siege warfare, political intrigue, and relentless pressure, both sultanates fell, adding immense territory and treasure to the Mughal domain, at least on paper. Yet the fall of these states did not bring stability. Their collapse removed buffers that had previously absorbed regional unrest, exposing the empire directly to local resistance movements, especially the Marathas. Led initially by the formidable Shivaji, their guerrilla tactics, deep knowledge of the terrain, and flexible command structure proved devastatingly effective against the Mughal army's slower, conventional forces. Although Shivaji died in 1680, the Maratha resistance only intensified. It evolved into a decentralized network of commanders who could retreat, regroup, and strike again, forcing Aurangzeb into an endless war of attrition. This conflict defined the second half of his reign, draining the treasury, exhausting the army, and tying down hundreds of thousands of troops who might otherwise have secured other frontiers. Yet Aurangzeb refused to compromise, believing that retreat would signal weakness and invite rebellion elsewhere. So instead he expanded the empire further, pushing Mughal authority deeper into southern India than ever before. He captured forts, annexed territories, and installed governors loyal to the crown. But each new conquest required garrisons, administrators, and revenue extraction, increasing pressure on local populations and fueling resentment. Aurangzeb's military expansion was accompanied by a significant shift in imperial ideology. He sought to align the state more closely with Islamic law, reintroducing the jizya tax on non-Muslims and curtailing certain courtly practices he viewed as un-Islamic. These decisions remain deeply controversial among historians. While some scholars argue these policies alienated large segments of the population and intensified resistance, others note that Aurangzeb continued to employ large numbers of Hindu officials, generals, and revenue officers, suggesting that pragmatism often outweighed ideology in daily governance. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, as Aurangzeb attempted to rule according to his moral convictions while managing the realities of a diverse empire. As expansion continued, new rebellions erupted across the subcontinent, from the Sikhs in the Punjab to the Jats near Agra. Each reflected local grievances amplified by the empire's growing militarization. Aurangzeb responded with force, reinforcing the perception of an empire constantly at war with its own subjects. Yet despite these challenges, it's important to recognize the sheer administrative feat of Aurangzeb's expansion. At its height, the Mughal Empire, under his rule, covered nearly the entire Indian subcontinent. It was governed through a complex hierarchy of officials, revenue collectors, judges, and military commanders, all coordinated from a moving imperial camp that functioned as a mobile capital. This system allowed Aurangzeb to maintain authority across extraordinary distances for decades, a testament to Mughal institutional strength. But that strength came at a cost. The empire's finances became increasingly strained, with land revenue pushed to its limits. Peasants were burdened by taxation, and the nobles or jagadars competed fiercely for land assignments, leading to corruption and instability within the ruling elite itself. By the early 18th century, signs of exhaustion were unmistakable. Even as Aurangzeb continued to campaign relentlessly into his late 80s, refusing to abandon the vision of a unified empire under his control. When he died in 1707, after nearly 50 years on the throne, he left behind an empire larger than ever before, but also more fragile than it had been in generations. The expansion he achieved through force had not been matched by political integration or economic sustainability. Almost immediately after his death, the Mughal state began to fracture. Succession wars, regional autonomy movements, and foreign invasions accelerated the decline. This has led many historians to argue that Aurangzeb's expansions were both the empire's greatest achievement and its fatal overreach. Yet, to reduce his legacy to a simple narrative of decline is to miss the complexity of his reign. Aurangzeb ruled in an era of immense pressure, facing demographic growth, shifting trade patterns, and rising regional powers. His choices, while harsh, were shaped by a worldview that saw imperial authority as something that had to be constantly defended, expanded, and morally justified. Today, Aurangzeb remains one of the most debated figures in South Asian history, remembered variously as a pious ruler, a ruthless autocrat, a tireless administrator, and a conqueror who pushed an empire to its geographical limits. Understanding the expansion of his empire helps us see how power works at scale, how ideology and pragmatism collide in governance, and how even the most formidable states can be undone by the very forces that once made them strong. Through Aurangzeb's story, we are reminded that empires do not fall only because of weak rulers, but often because of strong ones who refuse to stop expanding. If there is another empire, ruler, or turning point in history you would like us to explore, let me know in the comments. The past still has lessons worth uncovering again and again. Thanks for watching.